Our next speaker is from the other side of Europe, from Ireland. Caitriona Ingoldsby works with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and is concerned with Ireland's visa problems. Why would Ireland have visa problems? Until about 20 years ago, everybody in Ireland was heading out. Now everybody wants to get in. It's a symbol of the kind of changes that Europe is going through, and a symbol of how difficult it is to try to understand a region like Europe from a single perspective. So let us hear from Caitriona Ingoldsby.
Thank you, Professor. As the Professor said, I work for the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, and it's a great opportunity. I think I speak on behalf of the group when I'd like to just thank you all for coming out tonight. I know with the traffic problems on the Bay Bridge, but just to say thank you very much, and I think it's very interesting for us as a group. We're from very diverse countries, even though we're all European, and I think we've learned a lot about the differences within Europe. So hopefully as you chat to us tonight, you get an impression of some of those differences and some of those similarities. I'm just going to talk very briefly about I guess the relationship between the EU and the US, and in particular the positive development that has had on my country, Ireland. It's a very small country on, as the Professor said, on the western side of Europe. There are those people who believe that the first European to discover America was Columbus. Now, of course, the rest of us know that it was in fact an Irish monk called St. Brendan the Navigator. He rowed across the Atlantic in a small little black boat made of cowhide with only a talking albatross for company, many years before Columbus. Or so the Irish legend claims anyway. But I think whichever camp you're in, there's no doubt that history is rich with the inextricable ties between Europe and the United States. And this shared history has always been checkered. It's never been one of complete and unquestioning agreement based, on a permanent positive relationship. But I do think that from the Red Coats and the Revolution, through the beaches of Normandy and the Marshall Fund, to the War on Terror and Guantanamo, though we haven't always agreed, the relationship does endure. And I think in particular, the bond between the people of Europe and America is very strong. Though Ireland only has about 5 million people now, there are over 30 million people in the United States. Some would say 35 million that proudly claim Irish ancestry. And I know that story is repeated for many of the small European countries that my colleagues here represent. And the United States, and in particular the Irish community in the United States, have played a hugely important role in the economic development of Ireland over the last 20 years that the Professor referred to. In 1987, Ireland had unemployment of about 17%, and in that year alone, over 25,000 young people had to leave to get jobs abroad. There were simply no jobs for Irish graduates, all university graduates, more or less. If they wanted to work in a professional field, most of them had to leave. And a significant number of those people would have come to the United States, as previously waves of immigration from Ireland had also ended up in the United States. At that time, over 1/3 of all tax revenues in Ireland went towards servicing our national debt. So basically it was just interest on the debt we owed. But by 2007, 20 years later, we had full employment. And not only were Irish people no longer leaving, but that year 67,000 people came to Ireland and got jobs. And only 4% of our tax revenue was used for to service the national debt. So that's obviously a huge transformation. And I think both our membership of the EU and our very strong ties with the United States had a huge influence on this positive development in Ireland. Major US corporations like Intel, Hewlett-Packard, Dell, Microsoft, they all have their European headquarters in Ireland. Now, obviously over the last year, the last 18 months, the development in Ireland has slowed somewhat because we are an open trading economy that's export focused, but I think the point remains that over the last 20 years there has been huge development, and that the EU and the United States have played a particularly important role in that, and will continue to play a particularly important role as we reposition ourselves for the upturn and are ready to grow again when the time comes for that. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge the very positive influence that the United States had on the Northern Ireland peace process, and in particular the role of George Mitchell in that process. And I know he's now working with the Middle East peace process, so hopefully his experiences in Ireland, that he will be able to use them towards maybe a bigger, more global conflict. But it's another sign, a significant example of the good cooperation between the United States and Europe.